Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Agazi, and I'm the Teacher Development Manager for Macmillan Education. Thank you so much for joining our webinar this morning in conjunction with the Ministry of Barbados. Just before we begin, Janelle Little, the Education Officer for the Ministry of Barbados, would like to say a few words, and then we will begin the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Roina, and good morning, colleagues. On behalf of the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, I want to warmly welcome each of you this morning to the training webinar. I am immensely grateful to our partners, Macmillan Education Caribbean, for agreeing to host this webinar and to Charlotte Rance for facilitating it. Now, I am looking forward to this webinar because the synthetic phonics approach to reading is a method I presently and personally utilize with the struggling readers in my small community-based reading program. So I can personally testify that this method works as I watch my students grow into more confident and able readers. Now, having attended sessions with Charlotte before, I have absolutely no doubt that you will learn a lot this morning. But my sincere hope for each of us is that we leave this webinar today motivated to try this approach in our classrooms. So once again, on behalf of the Ministry of Education, thank you for joining the webinar and have a fantastic session. So now I want to turn over the session to Ms. Charlotte Rance, who will be our facilitator this morning.
Thank you very much, Janelle, for that warm welcome. And I will put my camera on and say hello to everybody. Okay, so as you will see in the chat box, unfortunately, due to the system that we are using, you will be unable to see each other's comments. However, I can see everything that you type and everything you can ask me. So just to check that you can all hear me okay, in the question box, can you please write the last thing you had to drink this morning? What was it? Let me find out, and we'll check that you can all hear me clearly. Let's see. Ooh, Morby. Okay, tea, very British. Well done, Rainer. Excellent. Water, me too, on the water. A vanilla cafe. Ooh, that sounds nice. Feeling a bit jealous of Gina there. Okay, a giant mug of tea. Good work. That's what we like to see. Good. So I'm coming through nice and clearly, and you should all be able to see my slides as well. Okay, so let's get going. As we've said, we are here today. Ooh, have I just turned that off? I might have just turned that off. Sorry. I will leave that on so you can see me. I'm just trying to move it out of my way. Okay, all right. As we have said, we are here today to start talking a little bit about synthetic phonics. And I'd like to start with a little bit of a challenge for you. So our first little warm-up challenge is going to be a spelling bee. Very easy, nice spelling bee. I trust that you will all be very successful at this, as you are all excellent teachers and wonderful speakers and writers of English. Okay, I'm going to give you 7 words. 7 words. I will say the word, and just like in a proper spelling bee, I will give you a sentence using the word. Then what I would like you to do is simply write the word in the question box. So your first word is disco. Disco. I haven't been to a disco since 2019. Okay, excellent, good. Oh, look at your spelling abilities, how wonderful. Excellent, all right. Word number 2 is two. There were 2 birds in the garden. 2. Good. No problems so far. I can see all of you know how to count as far as 2. Good work. All right. Word number 3 is plate. Plate. She put the biscuits on the plate. Lovely. Good. Excellent work. Well done with all your spelling. All right, it's going to start getting more difficult now. Our next word is circle. Circle. The children sat in a circle. Good. Brill. Next word is shoulder. Shoulder. I put my scarf over my shoulder. Lovely. All right. Next one. February. February. My husband's birthday is in February. Yay. Excellent. Good. No problem. Oh, who was that? Someone else has their birthday in February too. All right. Our final word is segue. The DJ segued between the song and the news. And now we see some differences coming. Okay, all right, a few correct answers and a few incorrect answers. We'll come back to these words in a minute. Okay, so our aims this afternoon in the first session are to have a think about why phonics has become so popular and so important in education around the world. We're going to be looking a little bit about synthetic phonics and in detail to show what synthetic phonics programs include. And then we're going to be breaking down some of the more complicated ideas within phonics as well. But let's get going. So we had no problems with our first word, but what I would like you to think about now, putting your teacher hats on, what makes these words that we just spelled difficult to spell? So our first word was disco. What makes disco difficult for young learners to conquer? Any ideas? Feel free to type your answers into the box. What makes disco a difficult word to spell? Any ideas at all? Sometimes it might be how we pronounce it. Absolutely. That is one way. Another thing, we also know that the yes, as Jolly has said, the k sound might be spelt with a K, might be spelt with a C. We're not sure. We also have some difficulties with sounds that combine together. So the sk, sk, sk in disco could be difficult for children, meaning that they have to come up with their own ideas. All right, our second word was two. What makes two a difficult word to spell? Now we all know there are several twos in English. What makes this one particularly difficult? It is indeed a homophone. Janelle, well done. The W, absolutely. Sharika is straight in there with the W. It is silent. You cannot hear it, as Sharon has pointed out. Absolutely. So we've got silent words. We've also got 3 variations of spelling for that word as well. And our next word was plate. Plate. Any ideas what might make this one difficult? Plate. It's that long A sound, isn't it? Plate. Plate. So we've got that silent E, the magic E, as it was called when I was in school, at the end of the word, and it changes the sound, but we don't pronounce it. Indeed, they need to have, as Jolie has said, they need to have knowledge of the variations of the long A sound. Indeed. We've got no idea how to spell those, and we're going to come back to this sound in a minute. All right, our next word was circle. Anything that might make this tricky to spell if you're meeting this word for the first time? Circle. Circle. Soft C. Yeah, we've got a C. That grapheme, the letter C, is doing two different jobs in this word, isn't it? It's doing a soft S at the beginning and a hard K in the middle. Circle. Which can be quite tricky for people to get their heads around. All right. Couple of complex combinations in the next one. Yes, that LE at the end as well, as Sasha points out, could be a challenge the first time we meet it. How do we use that LE? Is it circle, EL? Is it LE? Is it AL? We're not sure. What about shoulder then? What makes shoulder tricky? Any ideas? Let's see who's got the fastest fingers. Yeah, there's a few little tricky things in shoulder. Of course, that OU in the middle, it's a complex grapheme that we're encountering there. It has lots of different potential sounds. The ER at the end as well can be quite tricky because we don't say shoulder, we say shoulder, shoulder. So that can also be a challenge. That R is quite unpronounced, certainly with my accent. Yeah, it's controlled at the end indeed. Okay. I claim that nobody can spell this word. What makes February difficult? What's tricky about spelling February? Got a couple of little things that might trip you up. So, well, yes, as Vaughan has pointed out, it is a sight word. It's very difficult to decode, this one, unless you say February. We're going to come back to sight words in a little while. But that R in the middle of February is quite a tricky one. Some people say it, some people don't, but it should be there when we write it. All right, our final word was segue. Segue, and there it is. Now, some of you got it right and some of you got it wrong. Any idea what makes this one difficult? Yeah, that GUE at the end. When does UE make a way sound in English? Well, it doesn't. What makes segue difficult is the fact that it is a loan word. We stole it from the Italians. So we have lots of reasons here on the screen why English is a challenging language to learn to read and write. And I think for many of us, you know, we learn to read when we are children, and we somehow forget how tricky it was for all of us in the first place. But of course, Phonics has been created to support the growth of English literacy, and it is an approach that enables learners to tackle the words and the graphemes and the phonemes as they encounter them in a systematic method. So, why teach phonics? Well, on the screen right now, you should be able to see a quote from the Department of Education here in the UK. And this is a quote from back in 2010, which states that the evidence is clear. If we teach systematic, synthetic phonics, this is the most effective way of teaching young children to read, especially those at risk, those who have challenges with reading. Why, though? What makes synthetic phonics and phonics in general such a benefit for learners? Well, firstly, we can state that including phonics in our syllabuses improves reading ability. It also has the benefit of improving pronunciation and spelling as well. It's an empowerment tool. When we teach phonics in a systematic way, we're enabling young learners to support their own learning and their own development. It's a learner autonomy tool, as it were. It increases reading fluency, and with confidence in reading and fluency in reading, we're able to develop a love for reading as well. And an ability to be successful in your reading creates more and more of that love for reading. The more we read, the more we enjoy reading, the more we learn. And of course, as we've already mentioned, it's an encouragement for autonomy. It allows the children to take ownership of what they are doing, to participate in those adult-like behaviors that they see around them. Whenever they see adults with books, we see it from very, very, very young ages. Children picking up books, flipping through them long before they're able to read and sound things out for themselves. So it encourages that autonomy and that desire to be able to pick up books and read and make sense of the words that are on the page in front of us. So, what is phonics? We will go through this in a fairly straightforward way, I hope. But if you do have any questions, feel free to chuck them in the question box and I will do my best to answer them as we go on. So, phonics, in its most basic statement, is a way of linking the phonemes of English, the sounds of English, with the graphemes, the letter or combination of letters that we use to spell that sound. So, if we look at this as an example, we can see this word here has 3 sounds in it. It has ow, s, 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 house. There we are. 3 sounds. 3 sounds. We can also see that those sounds are represented by a number of graphemes. Okay, so we've got the to represent this first sound at the beginning, the letter H. We've got OU, which in this case makes our ow sound. And we've got the SE combination at the end to make the S sound, ouse. And as you can see, we have 3 sounds and we also have 3 graphemes. So it's important to remember that when we're talking about graphemes in phonics, it does not necessarily mean exactly one letter. In the case of the grapheme is a single letter grapheme, but with other sounds, we can have graphemes that stretch up as far as 4 letters for one sound. Okay, now in some languages, we have a situation where we find that languages are phonetic. This is not the case with English. In the chat box, can anyone tell me how many individual sounds there are in the English language? Does anyone know off the top of their head how many different sounds we have? 30 somethings is for one. Good guess, good guess. 42 says Anne, shooting a bit. We have 44 sounds in the English language. 44. All right, slightly easier question. How many letters do we have in the English alphabet? 26. There we go. Good. We all know that one off the top of our head. Brilliant. So we've got 44 sounds. We've got 26 letters. There is a bit of a deficit there, isn't there? And what this means is that over the years, we have combined letters together to represent those sounds that don't have a specific letter attached to them. And then we start getting into the complicated world. So for the 44 sounds of the English language, we have over 120 different ways of writing them, 120 plus graphemes in English that can be representing those 44 sounds. And people wonder why English is a difficult language to learn to read and write. People wonder why everybody's spelling is so bad all the time. It's because our language is very, very complicated to write. Now, here's a question for you up on the screen. How many graphemes can represent the sound A in English? So one sound, A. How many different ways are there to write it? Is it 4, 5, 6, or 7? In the chat box, what do you think? How many can you get? Anne's come straight in, going for 7. Any other guesses? Do we agree? Oh, a few people saying 6, a few people saying 5, a couple of people saying 4. Well, Anne got it spot on. There we are. Tamika, you're there as well. There are 7. We have A, the single letter A. A cat, for example, makes the A sound. We also have EY, like pray. We have AY, like day. We have EI. We have AI. We have A with a silent E, as we saw earlier with plate, so that elongated sound that we found with the silent E at the end. And we also have EIGH, A as in 8 or wait there as well. So one sound in English, as we can see, depending on the word you're writing, could have 7 different ways of writing it, which means that for our learners, we're constantly putting them in a situation where the ground is uncertain. The first time you hear a new English word, the first time you meet a new English word, how are you able to write it down? The first time you see an English word written down, how are you able to understand what those combinations of graphemes sound like in our ears? And of course, phonics was developed to help overcome these issues. Now, in phonics education, there are 3 main ways that phonics can be taught. Phonics might be taught as analytic phonics. It might be taught as embedded phonics, or it might be taught as synthetic phonics. Now, analytic phonics is the ability to analyze the differences and similarities between spellings of words. So, for example, as a teacher, you take the whole word, you might take a combination of words, so pet and pot, and you might ask your children in the class to identify what's the same and what's different about those words. So they might point out that they both start with the p sound, they both end with a t sound, and the vowel sounds in the middle are different. Alternatively, you might ask them to see what's the same and what's different about book and cook. But of course, analytic phonics depends on the learners having a strong basic understanding of what those sounds make and what those graphemes represent. Embedded phonics is taught as it's needed, and it's often found as part of a wider English curriculum. So it will depend on what you as a teacher feel needs to be highlighted, or what the course creators have decided is important for the children to learn. But of course, as it's only taught as it's needed, we end up missing a number of vital foundational blocks. Now, synthetic phonics is the most widely used of all phonics systems globally. It is the approach to phonics that's used here in the UK. They also use synthetic phonics in numerous other countries, in international schools, and it's developing in popularity even with non-native English speakers. So as a support mechanism for learners of English as well as first language English speakers learning to read and learning to write. Now, the systematic approach in synthetic phonics follows a very specific program. Let's have a look at that. Now, the first thing, of course, that we learn is the phonemes of the English language. We learn all 44 of those sounds. We also learn the graphemes that represent those phonemes. And as I mentioned previously, there are over 120 that we have to get our head around when we're learning to read and write in English. The interesting thing and the thing to remember about synthetic phonics is that these are approached in a systematic, cumulative order. We start with the graphemes that have one representation sound-wise, that are easy to identify, that are frequently used and common and easy to pick up. And you work then towards those more complex combinations and more blended sounds, multi-letter graphemes as you progress. Within synthetic phonics, children are also taught how to blend those phonemes together. So when they see the written word, they're able to fluidly and fluently combine those sounds together to make those words, to be able to blend them effectively. On the flip side of that, we also teach them how to segment the phonemes in a spoken word. So when you hear a word for the first time, we teach the children how to break that down into its individual sounds to enable them to come up with the spellings that will accurately represent the word they have heard. We teach within synthetic phonics that one phoneme, one sound, can be represented in multiple different ways, and that might be single letters, groups of 2 letters, groups of 3 letters, or groups of 4 letters. We also teach that the same grapheme, the same combination of letters, might make many different sounds. So alternative pronunciations for the same written representation. Now, I mentioned that synthetic phonics is a systematic approach, and for many teachers, a logical approach to teaching the sounds in English is, of course, alphabetically. But as we've seen, the letter A might have more than one representation, and the sound A certainly does. So when we teach synthetic phonics, a synthetic phonics program, whichever synthetic phonics program you are using, is not taught alphabetically. As I mentioned previously, synthetic phonics is taught according to a specific set of letters. And on the screen right now, you should be able to see what is a placemat for level 1 of the Snappy Sounds synthetic phonics program. So that's one of the synthetic phonics programs here from Macmillan. And as you can see, these are the first graphemes that are taught within level 1 of Snappy Sounds. So over the first 10 weeks of the course, these are the graphemes that the learners learn. And regardless of which synthetic phonics program you're teaching with, this order remains pretty much the same for everybody. The reason is that these are the most frequently used and simple combinations to understand. So they start with s, t, m, p, a. And these sounds, when they pick these up, so a as in ant, s as in sun, t as in tap, can be used almost immediately to start combining into full words with meaning behind them. So with those simple 5 letters at the top, we can make a number of different words. We can make tap, map, we can make pat, we can make Pam, we can make mats, etc., etc., etc. Those words that we can start building from the very simple representations of each of these letters. Okay, so as we've mentioned, during a synthetic phonics program, we're going to be doing a number of different activities. And the first of these is identifying the individual sounds within words, as it's known in phonics, segmenting, breaking the words down into sections of sounds or segments of sounds. Now, let me get my camera back up and I will show you what we're talking about. So, when we teach, this is the first sound that we encounter, the first grapheme that we encounter in all synthetic phonics programs, the S for sun. And when we're introducing new sounds in English, in a phonics lesson, we are giving the children an opportunity to, first of all, notice, and second of all, identify the sounds that we hear. Now, as you can see, this is one of the teaching cards, and on the front it's got the nice graphic image. On the back, as you will be able to see on the screen and also in front of you here on the camera, we have a number of different stages as we work through the lesson. And the first step to segmenting, as I've mentioned, is to notice and identify what's happening. So each lesson within Snappy Sounds follows the same lesson plan. We start by saying and modeling the new sound and encouraging children to hear that sound and identify what they can see around them that matches with those sounds. In Snappy Sounds, what we take is an I do, we do, you do approach to teaching. So it starts with you as the teacher providing that model, showing the shape of your mouth, the sound that you are making, where your teeth are, where your tongue goes, how do we correctly make that sound? And then noticing that sound around us. And we are going to have time today to look at a lot of different games and activities that we can use to practice these techniques in our classrooms. You'll notice on the screen that at the beginning, it's very much I do and we do. So the teacher providing the model and then the children working as a class all together. Of course, what we're doing is building up to independent practice, the you do aspect of the lessons. Now, once we have segmented and identified our individual sounds, we then move on to blending. And blending, as we mentioned, is combining sounds together, individual sounds together to make words. So in this case, if we are blending, if we've learnt the sounds s, I, t, we can combine those together. S, it, sit, 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 until a natural pronunciation of the word occurs. So lots and lots of activities to help students practice blending is key to success in a phonics program. Of course, why we are doing this, we want to get to a level where we are able to read independently. And while it may seem that phonics is a bit of a slow process, because it is done step by step, it is done systematically moving forwards, we're also in a situation where we have the ability to create what is known as decodable readers. If a word is decodable, then with the knowledge I have in my head, I can break that down and I can make that make sense in my head. Now, decodable reading and encoding and decoding, or reading and writing, as it were. Decoding is reading, making sense of what you are seeing. Encoding is writing, turning your thoughts into accurately spelled words. Is where students have a lot of difficulties. And of course, we need to provide opportunities for them to make sense of that. So what you'll see here on the screen is an example of a decodable reader. And most synthetic phonics programs will come along with a selection of different readers that you can use within the classroom to help the children to read. This one here is an example of a level 1 reader. So it is actually level 1, book 1, the very first book. And on the back of the book, it will tell you, as you can see, that this book features the sounds and letters that you can see below. So our first one, s, at, and all of the words within the decodable reader are decodable using that knowledge, meaning that from the very beginning of a phonics program, the children are able to read independently. Now, decodable readers can always be a challenge for teachers. As a guideline, there are certain things that we should be looking for as teachers when it comes to a quality decodable reader. So just with any synthetic phonics program, just like that program, within the books, these should be gradually and systematically introducing phoneme, grapheme correspondences, letter and sound combinations, and providing the children with lots and lots of practice of those new letters and sounds. A good decodable reader will only use words that can be decoded, that can be interpreted and read, along with common high frequency words, or as they're known in phonics, sight words. And we'll have a look at the sort of words that are typically sight words in a moment. Every decodable reader should only consist of these things that children have already learnt, and sight words that they can recognize on sight. Of course, in an ideal world, your decodable reader is not just decodable, it's also a reader. It's also something that students want to read. So in this case, this means that the reader should make sense, it should have meaning, and it should be engaging. And one of the biggest criticisms of phonics in international education, wherever you look, in any country, is that often with phonics, meaning is overlooked. We're focused on the mechanics of how children read, but not how they understand. So if you're looking for a good decodable reader, what you want to ensure is that the story that you are reading makes sense. It should be comprehensible, it should have meaning, and it should be engaging and interesting. When it comes to the makeup and the layout of a decodable reader, we're looking for two key things. The first key thing that we're looking for is images that don't encourage students to guess too much. It shouldn't be too easy to guess what the next word is going to be. We want them to use their phonics skills to interpret those letters and then work out the meaning from the image, rather than work out the word from the image and we as teachers don't know if they're able to encode, decode effectively for themselves. So they should include images that don't encourage students to guess the words. They should also use text that is not too highly predictable, again, preventing the students from guessing everything that they are saying. And of course, the final thing is age-appropriate vocabulary. Now, another criticism of phonics is the fact that people who write phonics programs and phonics books just choose words according to the sounds, not according to the students that are using them. And it's been easy to identify over the years opportunities where children are able to read words that they don't have a context to use. So when we're looking for a decent decodable reader, another one of the things, the final thing that we're looking for is age appropriacy. Is this content motivating and engaging for the age group that we're working with? Or are these words just in here because they match the patterns that we are practicing? And you know, you're looking for stories that are at the right developmental age for your young learners, as well as making sure that you are practicing every element of your synthetic phonics program. Now, we mentioned sight words there slightly. Sight words are, as someone said in the chat box right at the very beginning, words that are not decodable, or at least not decodable yet. And as we said, introducing a synthetic phonics program is a gradual step-by-step process. We start in this order. By the end of the process, we have over 120 graphemes that the children can identify. So at the beginning, as we'll see, this is an example of the high frequency words poster from Snappy Sounds, and it shows at each level of the course where our sight words are. And you'll notice that the first one of the sight words here is a, as in the singular article. The reason that this is a sight word for level 1 here is that the first representation of this grapheme that children learn in any synthetic phonics program is that that letter represents the a sound, like ant. But of course, when we are using it as a word, its pronunciation is a. So while this will be decodable later on, at the beginning it is taught as a sight word. Other sight words are taught as sight words because they will never be decodable. And we can see an example there in level 4 where we've got Mr. and Mrs. These abbreviations are pronounced as Mr. and Mrs. And if we wrote them out in full, then that's how they would be spelt. But of course, most of the time, as we are writing them, we write them as their abbreviated form. And that abbreviated form, of course, is not decodable. Another thing that we encounter in the synthetic phonics programs, and another area that is hugely contentious along the way, is the idea of non-words. And the reason that non-words are included in phonics programs is because they are unknown. And unknown words within a synthetic phonics program are placed there to essentially aid and support assessment. Now, if we have taught certain patterns and certain graphemes, then the idea is that children are able to use their knowledge to decode the word in front of them. But of course, we've all met parents, and parents are brilliant at coaching. So within a synthetic phonics program, what you will find is that in order to stop children memorizing and rote learning all of the words that they've encountered in the classroom, an effective way to assess phonics development is by demonstrating and showing a number of unknown non-words. So if we take, for example, in the center of this page, the word strees, obviously it has no meaning and it is not a word, but we can encourage the children to sound that out so they can identify the combination between str, it's a very common blend in English, the str that we see in street. And we can recognize that double E in the middle as being a long sound. And we know that the E at the end will elongate that as well. And then they can decode that Z sound on its own. So ease, strees. And that's why the non-words are in there. Okay. Now, assessment, of course, is something that is typically done on a one-to-one basis. A teacher will sit down with that student and work through all of the sounds and all of the graphemes that have been taught over the course of the term or the year on a one-to-one basis. And by doing one-to-one assessment within phonics, we're able to identify all of those individual challenges. We're able to pick up on the students that are having more success, that are perhaps struggling, and we can identify which of those sounds, which of those graphemes are causing particular difficulty. To enable that process to work smoothly, it's always best to have pre-prepared materials at your fingertips. And as you can see, the phonics assessment pack from Snappy Sounds does do that for you, and we will have a look at it in a little more detail in a little while. Now, when it comes to introducing phonics in your classroom, there's a few little tips that we can try to live by. First of all, if we're working on a dedicated phonics program, we're wanting to see 5 or 6 dedicated phonics lessons per week. Phonics lessons typically between 20 and 30 minutes, sometimes up to 40, but dedicated sessions where phonics is front and center of that learning is the best way to work with a synthetic phonics program, to build up that pattern, to build up that knowledge. Of course, as with anything with young learners, it needs to be fun and it needs to be active. The more fun it is, the more active your lessons are, the more active your phonics instruction is, the stickier that information becomes, the stickier that knowledge becomes, and the more success the learners have in retaining the information that we're teaching. Involve the whole class. Assessment, of course, is a very one-to-one process. Reading in itself is very insular. It's you and the book, maybe you and the book and your reading assistant or your teaching assistant or your teacher or your parent listening. But learning of graphemes and learning of grapheme-phoneme correspondences should be a whole class experience, and giving lots and lots of opportunities to use all of those tips and all of those techniques and activities that you use in all of your lessons, just applying them in a phonics context. Golden rule is that we always do the oral first and the written second. So the first step in any lesson is to say and to hear that phoneme, that sound before we introduce the grapheme, the written representation. As we've said, sounds in English have multiple different ways of writing them. So if we can nail that pronunciation first, if we can model the sound and get that sound being repeated to us before we attach it to the grapheme, then that becomes much more successful. And then, of course, as with anything, practice makes perfect. So whenever possible, put a little practice of phonics in. All right, so a little bit of a quick summary, and then we're going to have a quick comfort break before we move on to the practical activities that I'm sure you're all dying to get your hands on. So a few questions for you just to check that you've been listening. In your question box, can you define what is a phoneme? In the chat box, do we know? Can we remember? Sure, many of us can, potentially. Let's see, who's got the fastest typing hands? Sounds, there we go, Vaughan, well done, absolutely, a sound. The sound is the phoneme, and there are 44 of them. Graphemes? Graphemes are the letters or combination of letters, the way that the sound is represented. Yes, it's a letter or letters to combine together to make those sounds. Indeed. Segmenting. Separating the sounds out, indeed, identifying those, not just the initial sounds, but the sounds within it. So if we have the word cat, we say, okay, what's the sound that you can hear at the end of the word cat? Cat, or the beginning, or the middle. Absolutely, those individual sounds. And blending. If segmenting is breaking apart the sounds in the word, then blending is putting them back together. Absolutely, Sharika, well done, first in with that one. So blending individual sounds together to make words, indeed. All right, okay. Finally then, what's the difference between encoding and decoding? Final question for you, and then we'll go have a little break. Encoding is writing and decoding is reading. Brilliant. And Karen and Sasha both straight in there. Well done, team. Okay, so we're going to take about a 10-minute comfort break. I'm going to